Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. And today is April the 30th. Yes, the last day of April. Can you believe that? 13 days until D-Day. I don't know about you. I mean, I get nervous too. I know that you're the one that have to take it, but I do get nervous. I want you guys to do well. But, I apologize to you guys because you've been thrown such a big curve with taking this test. So in Canvas, I, of course, put a Tom Ritchie video in there about the Philosophes as a group. But I also put a little 6-minute video about strategies, not just for taking the exam, but for taking this exam, the 2020 version of the exam, which will be online. And, please don't, I just don't think it's a good idea if you try to take it on your cell phone. I think you'll be better off if you type it on a computer. Of course, if you can't type, then you have to write it out, take a picture of it, and submit it as a picture or PDF or whatever. But there will be some opportunities that the College Board will be sending you to practice using their format. Please take advantage of those. Take advantage of those opportunities to practice. You've come too far now, and you've spent and invested too much time in this class to basically alligator arm it the rest of the way. Alligator arm, they call a football receiver, and I've talked about this before, who will not extend himself for a pass. They say he's alligator arming, and the ball goes past him. Don't alligator arm it. Throw your best pitch. And if your best pitch is not good enough, then it's not good enough. But if you alligator arm it, you give yourself no chance. And that's enough. I'm only going to talk to you about 20 minutes today about the Enlightenment, because you have obviously other things to do with the DBQ you have to write today. In Canvas, I'm still exploring Canvas. What I'm going to do is I had a couple people ask me for comments on individual papers. I thought there's a little box in Canvas at the bottom of the paper where actually for every paper I scored your DBQ. I'm going to use the bigger box, and I think that one will show up. I was afraid that if I use that bigger box, it would show up and everybody would see what I wrote to you. So I'm going to try that. Maybe it is just you. See, I don't, I had to admit how little I know about Canvas. And so, yeah. But anyway, we're only going to be 20 minutes, and we're already 4 minutes in. We are on Roman numeral 3, on Age of Science and Reasoning. You guys don't understand how much I appreciate your comments, constructive and otherwise. Mr. Lynn he is a bulldog, and you know what? I appreciate that. Do I agree with all of his comments? No, because unlike me, he is wrong 99% of the time. But no, I do. I appreciate your comments. Keep throwing them at me as far as, what you understand, what you don't understand, those kind of things. And any questions I can answer, I will answer. So Roman numeral 3. Many influences had brought on this so-called Enlightenment. One was the new Newtonian worldview, meaning that when Sir Isaac Newton had written this groundbreaking book, about the nature of the universe, about gravitation, people who were reading books, and still there weren't lots of people, but there were a good number, and the number was increasing. This was a game changer. I mean, it really was. It will be the same kind of game changer as when in the 20th century, Albert Einstein goes on and, of course, writes his papers on relativity. And now, and Mr. Lynn is now laughing because I'm beginning to venture outside of my comfort zone, talking about relativity and science stuff. But anyway, but no, I mean, Newton set one way of thinking. Einstein comes along and actually turns a lot of that on its head. And you know what? There'll probably be somebody who will come along and say that Einstein wasn't exactly right. But anyway, so this Newtonian worldview, Isaac Newton and John Locke were major forerunners of the Enlightenment, although Tom Ritchie said it was Voltaire. Newton's formulation of the law of universal gravitation, which does it still hold true? Actually, no. Once again, because Newton defined gravitation as a straight line, and Einstein said it operated more as a curve. Showed the power of the human mind, that he could sit there and think of those things. I mean, it really blows my mind at some of the things they could come up with, like Newton inventing calculus kind of as an afterthought. Einstein talking about his theories that, I mean, they're outside of my head, Mr. Lynn. I'll admit it, okay? Shut up. Yeah, it's outside of my head. Once again, the idea that you could go away traveling at the speed of light and return and come back and be younger than you are. Anyway, he encouraged the direct study of nature to avoid metaphysics and supernaturalism. And so, yeah, he said study and come up with logical reasons for why the world exists as it does. If nature, he said, was rational, then society should also be rational. If nature is rational, then society should be rational. And once again, here the Enlightenment thinkers begin to get outside of their ballpark because they're talking about human nature here. Society should be, and human nature is not rational. In an essay concerning human understanding, John Locke insists that man was born tabula rasa, or blank slate. This was a major premise of the Enlightenment, that man is born innately good and he's corrupted by society. Locke, rejected the Christian view that all humans were permanently flawed by sin. Britain provided for these people the example of a society that could be reformist and could work. So remember, most of the Enlightenment thinkers are from France and mainland Europe. And to them, they looked at Great Britain and said, oh, look, here's a country where the people vote, and here's a country where they have a representative type government, and they thought that Great Britain was the panacea. Great Britain was paradise. Of course, they were wrong. Britain, however, did allow religious pluralism, which wasn't allowed in all countries of Europe. Relative freedom of the press and religion existed. The courts in Britain protected citizens from arbitrary seizure and arrest, kind of, sort of. This arrangement had to the idealist observers, the philosophers on the continent, when they read about it, said, oh, Great Britain is just, it's the best place on the planet. Produced stability, prosperity, and a loyal citizenry. Although, as we're going to learn later on, they gave Britain too much credit because, as you all know, including Miss Menning, shout out to you, and Miss Harris, as you know, that up until 1833, less than 5% of the population of Great Britain could actually participate in actual government. But anyway, Roman IV. France needed to reform in many ways, even though it was the birthplace and the hotbed of the Enlightenment. I mean, which is odd. France had all of these Enlightenment thinkers, and it also had a social system and a taxation system that was archaic and grossly unfair. Louis XIV, remember him, Sun King, had left a legacy of a large army, absolute monarchy, heavy taxation, religious persecution. Remember, Louis XIV did away with the Edict of Nantes, kicked all the Huguenots out, and his successors, Louis XV and Louis XVI, continued to curb liberties. The only difference was, once again, Louis XIV was an efficient king. Louis XV didn't care, and Louis XVI was a bumbling fool. And things went from bad to worse to god awful, and that's when it blew up. France, though, became the center of the Enlightenment. Who was Francois-Marie Arouet? His name was Voltaire. This is Voltaire. That was his real name. Voltaire was Francois-Marie Arouet was like, his real name. Voltaire was a big mouth, but he is the most well-known name of the Enlightenment. He was imprisoned on 2 occasions for criticizing the government, and clever man that he was, he eventually said, well, if I'm going to get in prison, what he did then, he moved from Paris down to the French Alps. And then when he would publish something that the government might look upon as risque, he would simply hop across the border to a residence he kept in Switzerland, which, protected him. He visited England to observe toleration. He published Letters on the English. Letters on the English was actually a dialogue between 2 Persian people. One who visits England, I think it is. And then I'm sure Mr. William will check me and tell me I'm wrong later on. And then corresponds, tells his cousin living back in Iran or Persia what the English are like. Something of that nature. So he published Letters on the English, which praised the virtues of English and indirectly criticized the abuses of French society. Because you still had to be careful. You still had to be careful about, what you said about French society. He also wrote Elements of the Philosophy of Newton, which popularized the thoughts of Newton. He spent, as it says there, most of his life living near the Swiss border so that he could simply hop across the border and continue to write whenever things got too hot for him. In his book Candide, which is what he literally is what most known for, although he considered it kind of a lark, he attacked war, religious persecution, and what he regarded as the unwarranted optimism about the human condition. The Enlightenment was the first intellectual movement to exist in a print culture. Now, Johann Gutenberg's printing press had been around since 1456. And but this, and here we're talking about the 17th century, some 250, 300 years later. But this is the first intellectual movement that exists in a print culture where lots of people, relatively speaking, still you got to remember that the great majority of Europe can't read, but a whole lot more could read than used to. And these people read about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was the first intellectual movement to exist in a print culture where lots of people had access to that, where the printed word was so available. Although printed books provided a new resource, most messages were still done directly through this right here. The volume of, still newspapers, which were coming out now. Newspapers, what would happen would be that people would be sitting around a tavern. They would take up a collection, and somebody would go down and buy a newspaper. And then the one person in the bar that could read would read the newspaper to everybody else. Although, so the volume of printed materials during the Enlightenment increased sharply, and prose yeah, that's why we're quarantined. And prose came to be valued as much as poetry. Prose, that means writing essays, writing sentences, came to be valued as much as poetry, and the novel emerges as a distinct form of writing. Yeah, novel, a big book. By the way, I just over the weekend I watched It Too. No, you see, I used to read everything that Stephen King wrote, and actually, I thought his book It was one of his better ones. And I actually thought the TV version of It from the early '90s was not terrible. This version of It, well, but it's based on a novel. Okay. And so the novel emerged during the Enlightenment. Anyway, and the novel is just a long story. Actually, at first, the first novels were written as a series of journal entries, meaning somebody, in a fictional sense, every day recorded something to tell a story, or a series of letters between two people. And the letters are all put in a book. But anyway, the printed word had become the chief vehicle for communication of ideas and would remain so until the electronic revolution of our day. I mean, yeah, this started the Enlightenment, and only with the digital age, and there you're actually getting into, you know, about 2000 or so, when digital literature, digital writing replaces printed writing. So, towards the end of the 17th century, half of all books were religious. So, in the year 1699, half of all books were religious. But in the year 1799, only 10% of all books were religious. Books were not inexpensive. Remember that Abraham Lincoln, one of the stories about Abraham Lincoln was that he used to walk miles to borrow a book from the library. Books were not, he was like Bell, right? Bonjour. No, books were not inexpensive, but did manage to reach a wider and wider audience. Books and knowledge of books began to be associated with good taste. In other words, owning books and having knowledge of books began to be associated with good taste, just like owning works of art was associated with having good taste, and the aristocracy and the money class. This is the era when kings like, Louis XIV, Joseph II, Frederick the Great called themselves enlightened despots, which is another word for saying smart king. Smart king. I'm a smart king. I can do this. Authorship, for the first time, became an occupation. In other words, writing of books, people were actually making money off of it, or writing articles. A division soon emerged, though, between high and low literary culture, between writing to make people better and between writing to just sell books about bawdy subjects. The new print culture soon spread, and Enlightenment ideas to all parts of society. All right, part G. Now we're getting into the important stuff. The expanding literate public and the growing influence of secular printed material created a new and increasingly social force called public opinion. If you see a question about the intellectual movements, once again, the most important intellectual movement was the Enlightenment with all its flaws. Because one of the things that comes out of the Enlightenment is this thing called public opinion. There was no such thing prior to this, a public opinion. Public opinion seems not to have existed before the middle of the 18th century. What did Abraham Lincoln say about public opinion? And he was dead on right. Abraham Lincoln said, and I'm just quoting him, he has nothing with European history, but it gives you an idea. With public opinion, on your side, nothing is impossible. A leader can do whatever he wants. Without it, nothing can be done. In other words, you can't without the support of public opinion, even in these monarchical governments. Now there's a public opinion. Now there's, in France, it was called the Fourth Estate. Governments could no longer operate wholly in secret or with disregard to the larger public sphere. These governments, once again, no matter how dictatorial it was, no matter how monarchical it was, because there was a press and people had public opinion about it and people began to demonstrate about it, governments had to explain why they did things. They just couldn't just do things and then not worry about it. Continental European culture sensed the political power of the new print culture. And so governments also began using the print culture to spread propaganda and influence. They regulated book trade, censored books and newspapers, confiscated offending titles. In other words, remember, Voltaire got in trouble because he wrote books and wrote things that the government didn't like. And so, yeah, they censored it and imprisoned authors like Voltaire who overstep. We will begin tomorrow with Roman numeral 5. And tomorrow I'm going to go about 30 minutes because the review test isn't as demanding. And good luck today. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to write your score in that box, and I hope you can see it. I guess you couldn't see the other one that I wrote because I did. For every DBQ, I wrote something. That's how I scored it. And so I'll now write that in the big box, and hopefully you'll get to see that. Okay? So I'm going to go now, and you have work to do. It's a rainy day. One day this will all be over, and I miss you. So bye for now, okay? This is me waving bye.